Arousal, anxiety, and stress. Arousal is the intensity of behavior, with intensity being described as a degree of emotion that is felt in different situations. There are two different types of arousal, cognitive and somatic. Cognitive arousal is also known as psychological arousal. An example could be worry before a big game or negative thoughts regarding a below par performance in the last game, leaving you stripped of confidence going into the next game. Somatic arousal, or physiological arousal, is the physiological changes in the body as a result of heightened cognitive arousal. Factors such as heart rate, blood pressure, and potentially breathing rate all increase, while we also tend to sweat. Arousal is very sport specific in the sense that there is not a set arousal that is ideal for all sports. For example, physical contact sports require gross movement such as rugby, and these require high arousal in order to motivate players. However, non-contact sports with fine movements require low arousal in order to maintain absolute patience and concentration. Sports that could require this form of arousal are snooker and darts. The drive theory suggests as arousal increases, performance increases proportionally. As a result, there is a positive relationship between arousal and performance. The theory also states the quality of performance varies depending on skill level and arousal. Under high arousal, the dominant response is most likely to emerge. The dominant response is the behavior we are most likely to perform in a given situation, according to scienceaid.co.uk. Experienced athletes or autonomous learners' dominant response are usually of a high level as a result of the movement being almost second nature due to their frequent training. Consequently, under high arousal situations, an experienced athlete will be able to maintain concentration. However, if they're not sufficiently aroused, their performance will suffer as they do not care enough. On the other hand, a less experienced performer will have a dominant response that is not as good as they have not trained as much. This means under high arousal situations, they lose control and panic, resulting in subpar performances. However, under low arousal situations, novice performers, also known as cognitive learners, are able to concentrate on a movement that does not come naturally to them, which increases their performance. An example of the drive theory in sport would be the second serve in tennis. A cognitive learner may panic in such a situation, as this is their last chance of hitting the serve in, so they will be highly aroused and will likely revert back to just hitting the ball over the net in a looping fashion. However, an autonomous learner, such as Andy Murray, will embrace the pressure and serve a more complex spinning serve, which will more likely win the point. This is because they have more confidence in their ability, so will be unfazed and under-aroused. The main criticism of the drive theory is that it does not explain why high-level performers sometimes struggle to perform in high arousal situations. If the theory was correct, every high-profile athlete should perform on the big stage. One high-profile example of when this was not the case was John Terry's Champions League final miss against Manchester United. Terry was a boyhood Chelsea fan and had captained the side on the night, so when taking the potentially winning penalty, he would have been highly aroused. Despite this, Terry missed and Chelsea lost the game, showing athletes do not always perform under pressure. Another theory is the inverted U theory. According to pearousal.blogspot.com, the inverted U theory is the theory that arousal that considers the optimal performance occurs when the performance reaches an optimal level of arousal. On the graph, this optimal level of arousal is said to be halfway between no and full arousal, but in reality, it is sport dependent. For example, some sports such as football require different arousals at different times, such as when through on goal, arousal may hinder a striker as they need to keep calm, whereas when going in for a strong tackle, a midfield player needs arousal to motivate him. When under-aroused, a performer may not be focused or really care about the game, while being over-aroused can see them lose control and concentration. Both of these scenarios can lead to uncharacteristic, sloppy mistakes from an athlete. However, at a state of optimal arousal, a performer will have the right balance of motivation and concentration, allowing them to perform to the best of their ability. The Q utilization hypothesis is described as the effect of stress or increased levels of physiological arousal on attentional processing of information on elitetrack.com, and explains why athletes cannot perform under or over optimal arousal. When under-aroused, an athlete cannot focus on relevant stimuli as they are paying attention to unnecessary stimuli. This can slow movement and thus negatively impact performance. On the other hand, over-arousal can lead to an athlete solely focusing on the stimuli they believe is relevant to them and not focusing on what is going on around them. This explains how defenders in football can sometimes lose the man they are marking from a corner. Factors affecting the inverted U theory. There are three main factors that affect the inverted U theory: personality, skill level, and the sport in question. A type A personality, such as Zlatan Ibrahimovic, will thrive when aroused, so his performance will increase with arousal, while a type B athlete, such as N'Golo Kante, may struggle to perform when aroused. Secondly, a cognitive learner may perform best when not aroused, as they need to concentrate on their movements to get them right. For example, when diving and swimming, they may perform better in training as there is less pressure. On the other hand, an autonomous learner such as Adam Peaty will perform better in a race situation, as he does not need to concentrate so much, having dived repeatedly in training, so the added pressure only serves as a motivator. Finally, athletes performing gross, simple skills, such as running, often adapt a higher than normal optimal arousal, which is why the New Zealand rugby team are often seen performing the haka before games in an attempt to psych themselves up. On the contrary, fine complex skills require less arousal for optimal performance, which is the reason the audience is silent when a snooker player takes a shot. A good way to test the inverted U theory is to compare an athlete's performance in a sport they are unfamiliar with. For example, if Usain Bolt tried juggling for the first time, he may perform better when under-aroused, as he is able to concentrate more. However, he will always run 100 meters faster at an event such as the Olympic final, where he has more arousal. The one main criticism of this theory is the way it sets out a graph. On the diagram shown, the transition between low and high arousal is shown as a smooth curve. However, in a game situation, there are likely to be spikes of arousal. For example, in an official in rugby game made a bad decision against his team, Johnny Sexton's anger is not going to slowly build up. Instead, he is likely to have a sudden spike of arousal before quickly getting over it and carrying on with the game. The final theory of arousal is the catastrophe theory, which is similar to the drive theory in that it shows a proportional positive correlation between arousal and performance. It differs, however, at the point of catastrophe, point A. This is the point when something goes against the athlete, either a bad decision from an official or that they make a mistake. At this point, the performance arousal drops sharply. This drop terminates at point B on the graph, otherwise known as the make or break point. It is here the athlete has the chance to change to get their performance back on track. If they calm down, they can salvage their performance, and this is shown on the graph by an upwards dotted line leading to the point D. On the other hand, they can fail to regain self-control and allow their performance to spiral out of control in a disappointing fashion. This is shown on the graph as the downwards line leading to point C. A good example of the catastrophe theory in sport could be when England played Germany at the 2010 Football World Cup. With the score at 2-1, England midfielder Frank Lampard scored a goal that went over the line but was incorrectly ruled out. This poor officiating decision served as a catastrophe for the England team, whose heads dropped and at the make or break point failed to resurrect their performance. The combination of events ended in an embarrassing 4-1 defeat for the Three Lions. Although the catastrophe theory is fairly unfaulted, there is one criticism, and that is that it suggests an athlete's performance must drop once they have encountered a catastrophe. This is not always the case, as seen in Mo Farah's 10,000 metre run at the Rio 2016 Olympics. The English phenomenon surged to gold despite a mid-race fall. This catastrophe did not impact his performance as he went on to win gold. Another example is Sun Yang, who won the 1500 metre swim at the London Olympics 2012, despite an initial false start that saw the race restarted. Anxiety. Anxiety is a negative experience caused by worry and or apprehension. According to mind.org.uk, anxiety is a natural human response when we perceive that we are under threat. It can be experienced through our thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations. Anxiety is often felt in sport when a performer feels intimidated before a big game. There are two types of anxiety, cognitive and somatic. Cognitive anxiety is a mental anxiety. It entails the thought process of an athlete before a big event. Should cognitive anxiety be present, this process could include self-doubt or fear of negative evaluation. Cognitive anxiety normally comes on hours before a race. On the other hand, somatic anxiety is where the physiological effects of anxiety become present, such as increased blood pressure and heart rate. Somatic anxiety is caused by cognitive anxiety and normally comes on just before an event. On top of cognitive and somatic anxiety, there is also second dimension anxiety, which is Trait anxiety and state anxiety. Trait anxiety is where a person will generally perceive similar scenarios as intimidating, as opposed to only feeling intimidated at large scale or abnormal events. For example, a cyclist may always get nervous before a race, not just before big races. Trait anxiety is part of personality and as a result is largely stable. There are many things that may bring on trait anxiety, such as a fear of letting others down or maybe a fear of getting hurt yourself. When stepping up to take a potentially winning penalty in the Champions League final, John Terry may have felt both of these, and this could explain his miss. State anxiety is a person's immediate state of anxiety in one situation. As it is not stable, a person with state anxiety will not feel anxious at every scenario, but only specific ones. Using the same example as earlier, a cyclist with state anxiety may only feel anxious at large-scale events, rather than smaller ones that they are used to. This anxiousness could be brought on by fear of disappointing or wasting a rare opportunity, as well as being scared of a new environment. State competitive anxiety is experienced in perceived competitive situations. This could explain why Alexis Sanchez has disappointed since his move to Manchester United. The Chilean is clearly not intimidated by every football match, but the combination of the stature of Manchester United as a club and the expectation put upon him to be the best player may seem daunting to him. Trait anxiety can lead to a performer feeling nervous before every game or event. Livestrong.com describe it as differences between people in terms of their tendency to experience state anxiety in response to the anticipation of a threat. This lack of confidence can restrict an athlete from fully expressing themselves during a performance. For example, as a young player, Raheem Sterling showed nerves every time he went through on goal, and as a result missed big chances. However, since getting over these nerves, he has become a far superior player, and as a result recently won the Premier League's Young Player of the Year award. It can also stop players performing skills that they are more than capable of in any other situation. This can inhibit performance as players fail to attempt skills that could help their team win a match. For instance, as a winger in football, Jeffrey Schlupp is required to dribble often to help drive his team up the pitch. However, come match day, he only completes 14% of his dribbles, a stat that must make him feel nervous and unconfident whenever he goes on a dribble. These nerves can hamper both Schlupp and his team's performance, and this stat has come from the Daily Mirror. State anxiety can make a performer nervous in certain situations. It is described on Livestrong.com as the experience of unpleasant feelings when confronted with specific situations. The impact on performance depends on what type of state anxiety one is susceptible to. For example, if a basketball player was only anxious against big teams, they would be good in most of the games they played. This can be seen in footballers such as Romelu Lukaku and Eden Hazard, who are both star performers for their teams, but have been accused of underperforming when it matters most against the big sides. This has hindered both their clubs, who have ultimately also underperformed in big games this season. This would aid the team on the whole, but whenever they played a big team, they would be without a key component to their side. However, if the player felt pressure to perform well in small games and was only able to perform in big games, they would be useless in the vast majority of the season. This problem plagued Chelsea in the 2013-14 season, where a succession of losses against smaller teams led to them falling short in the title race. They likely suffered from a perceived pressure to easily beat inferior teams, whereas when the pressure was off against the big teams, they would win. It is also possible for performers to feel both state and trait anxiety in these scenarios. An athlete's state anxiety will be added on top of their trait anxiety. This means the higher their trait anxiety, the more anxious their state anxiety can make them. For example, if a hockey player has a trait anxiety which leads to them to fear any competitive situation, playing them in an Olympic final will only heighten their anxiety. However, if another hockey player experiences minimal trait anxiety but has the same level of state anxiety towards very big competitive situations, they will still feel less anxious as they are less anxious to start with. This is as a result of the first performance trait anxiety being higher than the second's. The cumulative effect of both types of anxiety sees both performers experience more anxiety than they are used to, and this abnormal fear will likely lead to a moment of catastrophe in their performance.